Okay, so today we're gonna dive into some stuff Elon Musk has been talking about.
Yeah.
And it's all from this like pretty wide-ranging YouTube video.
About a lot of topics.
Yeah, I mean, and our listeners are here because they want to know what he said, but they don't have time to
Right.
watch the whole thing.
Yeah, they want the quick version, but they also want the details.
Exactly. So we've gone through it and pulled out like the really important stuff.
All the insights.
And maybe some things that'll surprise you, but without like overwhelming you with information.
Yeah, because, I mean, the transcript itself, it really jumps around a lot.
It does.
Talking about making the government run better.
Yeah.
Where technology is headed and...
Big changes in like society.
Exactly, like how many people are having kids and things like that.
Yeah, so we're going to try to figure out what Musk is really concerned about. Like, what's his angle and what are the big takeaways from all this stuff? And then think about like what it could all mean like down the road.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I think we got to start with this government efficiency thing.
Okay.
Musk's vision is all about bringing back merit and freedom.
Right.
He's super focused on things like individual liberty.
Free speech?
Yeah, free speech, like getting the government off your back and making sure that it's hard work and talent that gets you ahead.
Absolutely. Classic American values.
Right. And to do that, he thinks we need to tackle waste and fraud in the federal government.
Yeah.
And he even points people to this website, doe.gov.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and he uses this Doge handle on X.
Doge.
Yeah, Doge, D-O-G-E.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny, but I think he's trying to make it...
Memorable.
Yeah, memorable and get people talking about it.
So what are some examples of this waste that he's talking about?
Well, he brings up some pretty specific stuff like
Right.
like funding for transgender comic books in Peru.
Okay.
And paying rent on buildings that are just sitting empty.
Wow. That is wasteful.
Yeah, and it might sound kind of out there, but I think he's trying to show that...
This is really happening.
Yeah, like this is the kind of stuff your tax dollars are going towards.
And it's not just these small examples either, right?
No, he also talks about this whole theory about an NGO scam.
An NGO scam?
Yeah, NGO stands for non-governmental organization.
Oh, okay. Right.
And basically what he's saying is that there could be this like circular flow of money from the government to these NGOs overseas, and then maybe even back to the U.S.
And how does that work?
Well, he doesn't really get into the specifics, but he kind of implies that it might explain why some members of Congress are like surprisingly wealthy.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, it's all pretty speculative.
Right.
But it definitely raises some questions.
It does. So basically with this whole Doge thing, he's saying, let's look at every dollar the government spends.
Yeah.
And see if it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Exactly. And he even points out that, this isn't like a brand new idea. Yeah.
He mentions that Clinton and Gore talked about similar stuff back in the day.
Oh, I remember that.
But the difference here is the scale.
Yeah.
Musk thinks we could make the government 15% more efficient.
15%.
Yeah, which would save like $1 trillion.
That's a huge amount of money.
It is. It's hard to even imagine.
Yeah, and a lot of people could probably use that money instead.
Right, exactly. So it really makes you think about where our priorities are.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the conversation then kind of jumps to the Biden administration.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and these claims that there are all these financial incentives for illegal immigration.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a hot topic.
Yeah, and it gets pretty specific.
Like what?
He's talking about things like Social Security, Medicaid, unemployment benefits, disability programs, even the IRS.
Wow, so he's saying these programs are actually encouraging illegal immigration.
That's what he seems to be saying.
Okay.
Like, for example, he says that it's way easier for non-citizens to get Social Security numbers now than it used to be.
And that there's been a big increase in that between 2021 and 2024.
Huh.
And he even suggests that some people might be getting tax refunds without having paid any taxes.
Okay. That's it.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It is. So then what about this asylum program?
Yeah, so he brings that up too.
Okay.
He says it's like a pathway to citizenship.
Right.
And that it takes about 5 years.
Yeah.
So the implication is that it's another big draw for people to come here illegally.
Okay, I see. So he's saying that the system is kind of rigged in a way.
Right. And it's not just about individual programs.
Right.
He also suggests that there might be a deliberate strategy behind all this.
Like what?
Well, he talks about changing the political leanings of swing states.
Ah.
And maybe even affecting voter turnout.
Okay, so he's going there.
Yeah, he is. And he even mentions these allegations of non-citizens registering and voting.
Wow.
which are pretty serious accusations.
Yeah, they are.
And he says that some of these cases have been referred to Homeland Security investigations.
I mean, that's a whole other level.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really controversial.
It does. But, I mean, it's interesting to hear what he's saying.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not just about the politics.
Right.
He also talks about the human cost of all this.
Yeah.
He says that these incentives are fueling human trafficking.
Oh, wow.
And that these criminal organizations are making billions of dollars off of it.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it's really awful. And he says that it's leading to the exploitation of vulnerable migrants.
I mean, it's a complex issue.
It is. And he doesn't just blame the federal government.
Right.
He also calls out states like New York and California
Okay.
for creating their own incentives for illegal immigration.
Interesting. So what's his solution?
Well, he doesn't really offer a specific plan,
Right.
but he does make it clear that he thinks all these financial incentives need to be shut off.
I see.
And he says that that's a big reason why there's so much political opposition to this whole thing.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a major sticking point.
Yeah, and he gives these really vivid examples.
Yeah, right. FEMA funds being used to house migrants in luxury hotels and giving them debit cards.
Okay, so he's painting a pretty stark picture.
He's definitely trying to get people's attention.
And I guess it leads into his next point, which is voter ID,
Exactly.
right?
He's a big advocate for voter ID requirements.
Mm-hmm.
He sees it as a way to make sure our elections are fair and secure.
Especially with all these concerns about illegal immigration and voter fraud.
Right, and he keeps coming back to this idea of transparency.
Yeah.
Like finding the facts, making them public, and acting quickly.
Which brings us to this whole thing about ghost payments.
Right.
What are those?
So apparently they found all these payments in government systems that have no explanation.
Like they don't say where the money went.
Yeah, and it makes it really hard to audit.
Oh, wow.
So Musk's team suggested to the Treasury that they should require payment classification codes and explanations for every payment.
I mean, that seems like basic accounting 101.
Yeah, it does, but apparently it's not happening.
That's scary. Yeah, and it's not just the Treasury.
Why?
They found similar problems at the Social Security Administration.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they said they found like $800 million that was basically unaccounted for
What?
because the payment plans extended beyond the system's recording capabilities.
Oh, wow.
And they also had really bad record keeping.
That's a mess.
Yeah, so to try and fix this, they're implementing two-factor authentication at the Social Security Administration.
Okay, so like when you log into your bank account and they send you a text message.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's specifically to combat all these fraudulent phone calls that people are getting.
Right.
But Musk makes it very clear that these efforts are not about cutting legitimate Social Security and Medicaid payments.
Yeah, that's an important distinction.
It is, because a lot of people rely on those programs.
Absolutely. So what's next on the agenda?
Well, then the conversation shifts to this whole issue of political polarization.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and Musk is really concerned about the level of violence and hatred that's out there.
It's scary.
It is, and he claims that it's mostly coming from the left.
Really?
Yeah, he gives these examples like Teslas being burned, dealerships being shot at, and even threats against the president and himself.
Wow.
Yeah, and he talks about how aggressive some of these protests are, with people literally calling for death.
It's awful.
Yeah, and he blames a lot of this on what he calls legacy media.
What does he mean by that?
I think he's talking about like the traditional news outlets, like the big newspapers and TV networks.
Okay.
And he says that they're making the polarization worse by focusing on certain stories and ignoring others and just generally pushing a certain agenda.
So he's saying they're biased.
Yeah, basically.
What about Twitter? I mean, X.
Yeah, so he sees his acquisition of Twitter as like a crucial step in fighting back against this.
How so?
Well, he thinks that Twitter, now X, can be a platform for more open dialogue
Right.
and a way to challenge what he sees as the dominant left-leaning narrative.
Okay.
Yeah, and he even says that he hopes other platforms like Facebook or Meta and CNN will start to do the same thing.
Like become more balanced.
Yeah, and he says that X is all about not favoring one side over the other,
Right.
and that they allow for all kinds of different opinions.
Even his own.
Yeah, and he points to his own interactions with prominent Democrats on the platform as proof of that.
Okay.
And then he makes this really interesting point about curated social media feeds.
Yeah.
He says that they create these echo chambers where people just see what they already agree with,
Right.
and it makes it harder for them to understand different viewpoints.
That's so true.
Yeah, it's like we're all living in our own little bubbles.
And it's so easy to get stuck in those bubbles.
Yeah, and it makes it harder to have productive conversations with people who think differently than us.
Absolutely. So what else does he talk about?
Well, then he gets into education.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and he's a big believer in giving more control back to the states when it comes to deciding what's taught in schools.
So less federal involvement.
Exactly.
Right.
He's not a fan of this idea of a national Department of Education.
Right.
He thinks it's pushing what he calls anti-American propaganda.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's also really critical of what he calls activist judges.
What does that mean?
He thinks that judges should just interpret the law as it's written
Right.
and not try to make new laws from the bench.
Okay.
And he supports this petition that's going around against activist judges.
I see.
And he's also worried about federal judges blocking actions taken by the president. He thinks that's overstepping their authority.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the actual content of education, he's a big advocate for bringing back a focus on classic literature.
Oh, like the great books.
Yeah, exactly. He thinks that's really important.
And what about the way schools are run? Does he have any thoughts on that?
He does. He makes this interesting observation about how the number of school administrators has been growing way faster than the number of teachers. Yeah, so it makes you wonder where all the resources are going.
It does. That's a good point.
And then looking ahead, he's really excited about the potential of AI.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Sorry.
He thinks it could be a really powerful tool for personalized learning.
Interesting.
Like, imagine having a tutor that's available to you 24/7.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, and he thinks that AI can work alongside teachers to make education more effective.
I mean, it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
It will. So where do we go from here?
Well, then the conversation takes kind of a sharp turn to the Federal Reserve and the national debt.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, these are big topics.
They are.
And Musk doesn't hold back.
So what does he say?
Well, he starts by questioning the whole purpose of the Federal Reserve.
Like, why do we even need it?
Yeah, and then he goes on to talk about how government spending is way out of control.
Yeah, we're definitely spending more than we're bringing in.
Right, and he says that we have a $2 trillion deficit.
2 trillion.
Yeah, which is like a massive shortfall.
That's a lot of money.
It is, and to make matters worse, he says that the interest payments on the national debt are now bigger than the entire military budget.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, and I guess this is where the Doge stuff comes back in.
Exactly,
Right.
because he's saying that we need to find ways to eliminate waste and fraud to get our finances back on track.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and he talks about how a $1 trillion increase in economic output combined with a $1 trillion decrease in the budget deficit could potentially lead to very low or even no inflation.
Which would be good.
Yeah, because he describes inflation as this pernicious tax.
Like a pernicious tax.
Yeah, like it's this hidden way that the government is taking money from people.
By devaluing the currency.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he makes this analogy that a country is like a person.
Right.
Like they can both go bankrupt if they spend more than they earn.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and he's really urging for immediate and drastic action on government spending.
Yeah, we can't just keep kicking the can down the road.
Right, and he even brings up Venezuela as an example of what can happen if things get really bad.
Oh, yeah, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, so he's definitely sounding the alarm bells.
He is, but then he kind of switches gears again.
He does. He has this quick but interesting moment where he talks about Fort Knox.
Fort Knox.
Yeah, you know, where they keep all the gold.
Oh, right?
And he says he's thinking about live streaming a visit there.
Really?
Yeah, so that the American people can see their gold.
Huh. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if he'll actually do it.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We will, but then he completely changes the subject and starts talking about advice for young entrepreneurs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of random, but it's interesting.
So what does he say?
Well, he starts by being really realistic.
Right.
Like, he says that starting and running a successful business is super hard.
Yeah, it is.
And that most businesses fail.
That's true.
But he says that the key is to create something that people actually need and want. Like something useful.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and he says that being useful is the most important thing.
More important than making money.
Well, he doesn't say that explicitly,
No.
but he definitely emphasizes the importance of providing value to others.
I see.
And he also says that he admires anyone who's doing honest work.
It's good sentiment.
Yeah, and then he gets into this definition of profit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He says that profit is the difference between the value of your output and the cost of your input.
No.
So basically, you have to make sure that what you're producing is worth more than what it costs you to produce it.
Which could be a challenge.
It definitely can be. And then he moves on to talk about population trends.
Oh, wow. Okay, another big topic.
Yeah, he's all over the place.
He is, but that's what makes it so interesting.
It does.
So what does he say about population?
Well, he's worried about population collapse.
An population collapse.
Yeah. He says that the birth rate in the U.S. has been below replacement levels since the 1970s.
Really?
Yeah, and that it hit a record low last year. And he says that this is happening in almost every country around the world.
That's concerning.
Yeah, and he thinks that if we don't do something about it, humanity could start to decline.
I mean, that's a pretty dire prediction.
It is, but he also talks about the personal side of it, like how having children can bring a lot of fulfillment and happiness.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and then he briefly mentions the Postal Service.
Okay.
He doesn't really say much about it.
Right.
But he does ask for input from anyone who works there on how to make it better.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he specifically mentions the issue of pricing for package delivery.
Like how it's different for big companies versus regular people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also wonders if there's too much administrative overhead.
I mean, that's a common problem in big organizations.
Yeah, it is. But then he jumps back into the world of future tech.
Okay.
And he gives some updates on Neuralink and robotics.
Cool.
Yeah, so Neuralink is this company that's developing brain-machine interfaces.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and they've been working on this blind sight technology.
Blind sight?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Like for people who can't see?
Exactly.
Wow.
And they've had some promising results in monkeys.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Musk says that they're hoping to do the first human implant later this year.
For someone who's completely blind?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It is. And even though the initial vision might be low resolution, the goal is to eventually achieve what he calls supernormal vision.
Supernormal vision?
Yeah, like even better than regular vision.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And then on the robotics front, he says that Tesla is on track to have fully autonomous robo-taxis by June.
Like self-driving taxis?
Yeah, that can operate without any human supervision.
Is that a big step?
Yeah, it is if it actually happens.
Right, because they've been promising that for a while now.
They have, so we'll see.
We will. But then he brings the conversation back down to earth.
He does, and starts talking about this idea of finding peace in a divided world.
Which is something we all need right now.
Yeah, and he specifically calls for the reinstatement of the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012.
What's that?
It's a law that's supposed to prevent the government from spreading propaganda to its own citizens.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and from spying on them.
Okay.
And he's really concerned about all these recent acts of violence against Tesla and himself.
Yeah, you mentioned those earlier.
Yeah, and he even speculates about who might be behind it all.
Like Korea.
He mentions people like Soros, but he doesn't really provide any evidence.
Right.
But he does say that he hopes dialogue will replace violence.
I think we all hope for that.
Yeah, and that there will be legal consequences for anyone who breaks the law.
Absolutely. And then he moves on to the family court system.
Yeah, this is another area where he has some strong opinions.
Like what?
He's specifically worried about the situation in Dane County, Wisconsin.
Okay.
He talks about rogue judges and other people in the system who are supposedly making decisions based on their personal beliefs.
That's a serious accusation.
Yeah. It is, and he says that it's hurting families.
How so?
Well, he gives some examples from California about what he calls state-mandated indoctrination.
Like what?
Like forcing kids to learn certain things in school that go against their parents' values. And he even says that the state can sometimes take children away from their families.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty scary stuff.
It is. And what's his main point about all this?
He believes that parents should have the ultimate authority over their children.
Right.
Not the state.
So less government intervention in family matters.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then finally, he talks about this upcoming special election in Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, it's for Supreme Court Justice.
Right.
And Musk makes it sound like it's a really big deal.
Like how big?
He says it could even determine which party controls the U.S. House of Representatives.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's clearly not a fan of one of the candidates, Justice Janet Protasevich.
So he's implying that people should vote for her opponent.
Yeah, he doesn't say it directly, but that's definitely the message.
Okay.
And he also emphasizes the importance of voter ID.
Right.
And reminds people that they can register and vote on the same day in Wisconsin.
Which is helpful.
Yeah, so it's interesting how he brings it back to this core issue for him
Right.
of election integrity.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
a lot of different topics.
Yeah, and it's kind of all over the place, but I think there are some common threads,
Definitely.
like this desire for more efficient and transparent government,
Mm.
this worry about political polarization and violence,
Right.
this excitement about future technologies.
And then these really fundamental questions about society.
Yeah, like how many kids we're having and whether our democracy is really working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot to think about.
It is. So we've tried to give you a good overview of everything that Musk talked about.
Yeah, all the key insights and some of the surprising details.
And now we want to leave you with a final thought. Think about how all these seemingly separate issues are actually connected.
Yeah.
Like, how does the efficiency or inefficiency of our government affect the economy?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that then influence personal decisions like whether or not to have kids?
Right.
And what role can we each play in fostering more productive conversations?
Yeah.
And making sure that we're getting accurate information in this world where everyone seems to have their own version of the truth?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about Musk's efforts to improve government efficiency, you can check out that dodu.gov website.
Okay.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep thinking critically about all these important issues.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.